perfect game is more skill or luck? Right now, it's 64% saying luck,
Okay.
which is really interesting.
Well, I asked David Cohn that because he threw a perfect game. How much is luck and how much is skill?
It feels like it's exactly backwards. It's got to be at least 70% skill and then some luck.
I would say it's, well, you know what? I'm not going to give my number yet. I'm going to bring in David Cohn. Ask him since he threw a perfect game. David, thanks for joining us. If we were going to go the percentage of skill and luck in throwing a perfect game, what would you say that percentage would be?
Well, it's an interesting point because not every pitch thrown in a perfect game is a perfect pitch. So when you do make a mistake, the hitters have to cooperate, right? And miss it or pop it up. And certainly there were a few of those last night for Domingo Germán. But I will say this, there's much more stress in a perfect game. Every time you get to a 3-ball count, you know you can blow it with a walk. Whereas, if you walk somebody in a no-hitter, you still have the no-hitter. So we've seen no-hitters thrown with 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 walks sometimes. But that's different in a perfect game, much more pressure. So I would say the skill's more important in a perfect game because of the pressure than a no-hitter where you have margin for error if you walk a guy.
I'm wondering, more pressure is felt by the pitcher in a perfect game or his teammates in a perfect game?
That's a great question, Dan. I know I watched David Wells throw his perfect game the year before mine. We went back-to-back years, 1998, 1999. And I was a wreck watching his perfect game in the dugout. I mean, I was just a nervous wreck. When you're actually participating, when you're the pitcher in a perfect game, you are just desperate to maintain your focus. Nobody wants to talk to you. You're anxiety ridden when you're the pitcher in that game. So maintaining your emotions is a full-time job. Whereas actually watching it, you allow all those negative thoughts to creep into your mind. What if he blows it? What if something happens? You have more time to think if you're actually watching it.
As a pitcher, when you take the mound, is your goal to throw a perfect game every time you take the mound? I mean, do you have to have that mindset when you go out there?
Well, yeah, I think your goal is to win every pitch. Your goal is to not walk anybody. Your goal is to consistently get ahead in the count, to maintain count leverage. So yeah, in that sense, I guess, you certainly want to win every at bat. You want to get everybody out that you can. And then when you do give up hits, you kind of brush it off because that's to be expected. But yeah, your mentality is sort of going in, strike one, I'm going to get this guy out. I'm going to get ahead of him and then get him out and stay on top of the hitters all day long.
What do you remember about your perfect game? It came against the Montreal Expos. Who was in the lineup that day that you worried about?
Well, Vladimir Guerrero was in that lineup, a Hall of Famer. Jose Vidro, a really good player, an all-star second baseman, was in that lineup. So those two really worried me more than anything. And Vladimir Guerrero presented an interesting problem because he could hit everything. He was the best bad ball hitter since Yogi Berra. Yogi could hit everything over his head, almost one hop it. We saw Vladimir Guerrero get a hit when the ball actually bounced one time. So no matter what, which pitch I threw, he was the guy I worried about because he could hit anything.
Did you use sticky stuff back then?
Not a lot, really. Occasionally on a cool night, I would grab the rosin bag that was in the batter's box circle because it had a little pine tar on it. So yeah, I mean, I guess you could say, yeah, I did at times use a little bit of pine tar with rosin mixed on a cold night, but we didn't realize how much it could help your spin rate. We didn't know anything about spin rates back then, or if we did, we didn't know how to measure them. So certainly I was worried about blisters too. If you use too much stickum, is that going to rip the pads off my fingers? I was more worried about, worried about messing up my fingertips and getting blisters than anything else with sticky stuff.
I'm wondering why baseball doesn't come out with their own products, that these are the only products you can use, and that's it. This is going to be approved by hitters. This will be approved by pitchers. And anything after that, you're going to face a really long suspension.
Yeah, I think Major League Baseball feels like they kind of have done that with just the rosin bags that are on the mound itself. And that's what they're policing this year. You can't have your own rosin bag in your locker. You can only use the one on the mound. You can't weaponize the rosin. If it gets too sticky, we're going to bang you for that too. The problem with Major League Baseball is they're obsessed with strikeout rates. The strikeout rates are so high in the game today that if they present a new product or a sticky baseball like the one they have in Japan, a pre-treated baseball, that the pitchers are going to take advantage of that and increase the strikeout rates. So I think that's why Major League Baseball is reluctant to do exactly what you said, Dan, and sort of come up with a universal product that works. They're worried about pitchers weaponizing whatever they introduce into the game and increasing the strikeout rates.
Yeah, I'm wondering about that because there's no shame in striking out anymore. It's not a big deal. It used to be, it was like, hitters would hang their heads as they walk back to the dugout. When did it change that it's not an embarrassment to strike out 150 times?
Yeah, it's sort of a perfect storm of things. I think the underrated facet is the strike zone itself. Back in the 90s and 80s, it was more of an east and west strike zone. And if you threw a pitch right down the middle and the catcher caught it at his mask, that was an automatic ball, much less high curveballs that were up that way that are called strikes nowadays. So it's more of a north and south strike zone. We don't get those pitches off the edges like we used to. I mean, Greg Maddux and John Smoltz and Tom Glavine and myself, we all lived off the edge of thigh high off the outside corner. That was where the margin was. We got pitches called off the plate strikes, but we never got the high strike called. So that's the difference. The power, pitchers are throwing harder than ever before. The strike zone is higher than it's ever been before. Really, you have to go back to Jim Palmer, back with the outside chest protectors. Remember the bubble chest protectors?
Yeah.
Lee Wire, those old umpires. That was a higher strike zone back then in the 60s and 70s. But pitchers didn't throw as hard as they do nowadays. So every reliever throws 95 miles an hour plus, a lot of them 100 miles an hour. That coupled with a high strike zone has led to a higher strikeout rate, along with hitters trying to drive the ball. The power is premium. Power hitting, power pitching equals more strikeouts.
Talking to David Cohn, the Yes Yankee analyst, joining us on the program. You were a Yankee. You were a Met. If you were a Met fan, can you say, let's be patient? If Steve Cohen said, hey, I'm not going to act like you want me to. I'm not firing anybody. We're not doing anything crazy here. How do you preach patience with a team that's got a payroll as large as the Mets?
Really hard to do right now. The Atlanta Braves are a juggernaut running away with the East. You're 8.5 games out of the final wild card spot if you're the Mets right now. So if you're looking at the very final wild card spot, like the Philadelphia Phillies did last year and rode all the way to the World Series, they won 86 games and still got to the World Series. That's a long shot for the Mets right now. They have, according to betting odds or predictive odds that are out there, like less than a 5% chance right now just to make the playoffs. So that is in and of itself daunting. They really need to look at this trade deadline as sort of reconfiguring their roster, in my opinion. Sort of what pieces don't fit together, what pieces are kind of aging. They have some pretty good young players that have come up and helped, whether it's Brett Beatty at third base or Alvarez at the catching position. They have a couple of others that are on the way as well. That's the future for them. They sort of need to reconfigure their roster. They probably need to look for trade partners. I wouldn't be surprised to see even the Yankees and the Mets hook up in this trade deadline, because Billy Epler used to work for Brian Cashman. Steve Cohen, the owner of the Mets, doesn't care where the trades come from. He doesn't have this sort of mentality, this anti-Yankee mentality. He's a businessman. So the days of the Wilpons owning the Mets and not trading with the Yankees are kind of over in my mind. So there could be a match there. If the Yankees need an outfielder, do they match up with somebody like a Starling Marte or something like that? I think those are the type of deals the Mets need to look for at this trade deadline.
I'm wondering if 15 years from now, we look back on Shohei Otani and what he kind of birthed, that you will have these two-way players. That, in high school, your shortstop is your pitcher and usually batting third in the lineup there. And I don't know if you were like that, but it feels like these guys grow up being hitters and being pitchers. Are we going to have not a wave, but at least a few of these two-way players in Major League Baseball?
It's a great question, Dan. I think, yes. I think Shohei Otani is inspirational in that regard. He's a trailblazer. He's showing the way. And there's certainly, we saw kids in the College World Series this year that are two-way players that are throwing the ball in the upper 90s. The left-hander for Florida that started that final game is one of those kids as well. So yes, my answer is yes. We're going to see kids that try to do it, organizations that will bring them along in the minor leagues and kind of experiment with it and allow them to explore whether they can handle both or not. But why not? Shohei Otani is the MVP because he plays such an important role on their team on both sides of the ball. So why wouldn't you want that? Why wouldn't you want that double value if you can develop that in your own system?
Should he get 2 salaries?
Interesting. Well, what he should get is probably equity in the team that signs him. At this point, I mean, if you're trying to sign Shohei Otani and you're the Anaheim Angels, how do you entice him?
What would you do at the trade deadline? if they haven't agreed to anything, contract extension, not much has been made public here. But at some point, the Angels have to have something in return if Shohei doesn't want to stay.
Yes, I believe that they need him to stay so badly that they need to hold on to him and hope they get into the playoffs and hope he becomes a postseason hero for them. At least get them in a position to win a wild card spot in the West, which they currently are very much in the running for. So, yes, you let that play out because your best chance to sign Shohei Otani back is a long and deep postseason run with him and Mike Trout that kind of shows him, hey, you should stay right here. We're on the right move here. We're moving in the right direction. So, yeah, with that being said, there might be a blockbuster trade out there, Dan. You're right. I mean, you have to listen. You have to listen. If there's a blockbuster trade where you can really get an incredible value back, then you have to consider it. But I still believe they want to keep him, and the best way to keep him is to get to postseason and show him what it's like to have postseason ball at the Big A.
Great to talk to you as always, David. Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure, Dan. Anytime.
That's David Cohn, 5-time World Series champ, and he's an analyst for the Yankees Network. He threw his perfect game at Yankee Stadium against the Expos back in 1999.